here with another video. Today's topic, Nick the DM here with another video. Today's topic, Wyrms. Nope, not those type of worms, Dungeons and Dragons worms. Nope, still wrong. I'm talking about the oldest, strongest, and scaliest of the dragons, the worm and the great worm. Dragons in Dungeons and Dragons are unique creatures. The older they get, the stronger they become. In 5th edition, dragons have 4 age categories: wormling, young, adult, and ancient, ancient being the strongest of all of them in 5th edition. Earlier editions cover ages between the ones listed. 3.5 has wormling, very young, young, juvenile, young adult, adult, mature adult, old, very old, ancient, worm, and great worm. The eldest dragons are so old and powerful, but are incredibly rare. Oftentimes a dragon won't even reach this age. They will either be killed by a rival dragon or a group of adventurers. Dragons this strong should only be used as epic level threats for parties either level 20 with legendary gear or parties going past level 20. That's a debatable topic. I'll touch on it in another video. Now, I know what you might be asking. How can I use these dragons to kill my players? I mean, present them with an epic challenge. Well, I didn't spend the time writing out a stat block for each worm and great worm in all the dragons categories. That would be very long and frankly would probably be boring for everyone if I went over them each. What I did do is I made a system to show you how to stat them out in your own games. As an example, I started with a chart aging up the red dragons from 5th edition to worm and great worm status. What I did is I put all of the different dragons based on their ages in 5th edition in a document and compared how the stats change from each age category, from wormling to young, young to adult, adult to ancient, and then from there I used the same kind of jumps and progressions to make the worm and great worm categories. First to touch on, we'll go armor class. So wormlings, basically the very moment a dragon is born, their scales are incredibly tough. So their armor class already starts at 17. When they turn into a young dragon, they get an 18, so a +1. Adults get a 19. Ancient dragons will get a 22. This is red dragons. So 17, 18, 19, 22. For the worm, W-Y-R-M, for the worm I did a 23 armor class, and for the great worm a 25. A 1 armor class jump for the first age category past the ancient, and then a 2 armor class jump to the great worm. For hit points, I did this, I had a very specific system for this. So often when you're presented with a stat block, you are given the average HP for the monster, which shows you the dice which you would roll for average, their hit dice, and plus a certain number to just round it off. Wormling have 75 HP, which is 10d8 plus 30. The young dragons have 178, 17d10 plus 85. What I noticed is the plus to their HP, so the 17d10 plus 85, their 85 is fairly close to the wormling's average 75 hit points. That trend carries on very similarly with the adult. When they go from young to adult, they have 256 hit points, 19d12 plus 133. So they have a plus 133 where the young's average is 178. Not exactly the same, but it's fairly close. And you could see the same thing with ancient. Adults have a 256 hit points. Ancients have 546, 28d20 plus 252. So their plus is 252, and adults' actual average is 256. So you see where I'm going with this. For the worm, I have their average, I have 28 d20, so the same number of d20, but their bonus to health is 500, closer to the ancient category, bringing their average health to 794. Keep in mind, this might seem like a lot, but compared to other epic level threats, dragons don't have many resistances or immunities unless you're giving them items or bonuses or a specialty homebrew dragon. Otherwise, they'll only have like 1 immunity, and that's about it. Great Worm, same kind of concept. I did they 28 d20, so the same number of d20, but plus 696, which is about 100 less than the worm, but it brings their hit point maximum or hit point average to 990 hit points. Fairly decent scaling. So again, to reiterate, I've taken the average hit points, as the other age groups did. Their average hit points are added to the bonus for hit points for the next Dragons age category. I've done that. There will be pictures so you can see how I've done this. Movement speed. Movement speed, I haven't changed too much. I've just given them a little bit more flying speed. They're going to pick up more wind with their wings. Movement on foot hasn't changed too much. The Ancient Red Dragon has 40 feet of movement speed, 80 feet of flying speed, and a climb of 40 feet. All I've done for Worm and Great Worm is increased for Worm their fly to 100 feet, and for Great Worm their fly to 120. They're very big, so their movement probably won't get any better. Their climbing will probably stay the same. They're fairly heavy, but their wings are going to pick up more wind, so they'll be able to fly faster. That's pretty easy. You just give them a slight increase to movement. Movement's not going to be too much of an issue for them. They're not often going to be running away, especially red dragons. Stats. Stats jump a little bit, and a topic that I'm probably going to touch on in another video is in the Dungeon Master's Guide. They do say that stats cannot go above 30. I slightly disagree with that, depending on what you're doing with them, depending on if you're having a campaign where they're fighting gods, demigods, or archdevils, things like that. I have not gone above 30. You can feel free to change that whenever you do that, but just wanted to touch on that subject. So, wormlings. Stats. Wormlings have a strength of 19. Young have a strength of 23. Adult 27. Ancient 30. Because I didn't want to break the rules out and I'd leave that up to you for your campaign, and because of the fact that they're still going to have more hit points and more damage dealt, I kept their strength the same. So Worm has a 30 as well, and Great Worm also has a 30. Kept like that. If you wish to increase that, that's up to you, all up to your campaign. Dragons often aren't very dexterous. They're very big, they're very strong, but they're not particularly fast. That's their one weak spot. So wormlings have a 10 dexterity, which stays across the board from young to adult to ancient. All 10 dexterity, which is a bonus of 0. Now, another topic that another option you might want to consider adding. I kept Worm and Great Worm at a 10 as well. But they've gotten so big, you might consider dropping it down to a 9 or an 8, giving them a negative. I didn't. I just kept it the same. I think they're going to be a big enough threat, and I don't think that negative one's going to make too much of a difference. Constitution. 17 for Wormling, 21 for Young, 25 for Adult, 29 for Ancient. So a jump of +4 from Wormling to Young. From Young to Adult is another +4. From Adult to Ancient is another +4. So they've jumped by 4 each category. For Worm, I've kept it the same because they're not too much different than Ancient, but Great Worm have aged out so much that I increased theirs to a 30. Again, if you're doing this with a green dragon, they're poison immune, they're probably going to have a lot of constitution. They live mostly in swampy areas. You might, if you're going above 30, go to like a 32 or something like that. Again, all up to you. Intelligence. Dragons are fairly intelligent, most of them, except for white dragons. They're pretty dumb. Intelligence, Wormling 12, Young 14, Adult 16, Ancient 18, a +2 for each one. I've kept that trend the same. 20 for Worm, 22 for Great Worm. Wisdom, 11 for Wormling, 11 for Young, 13 for Adult, 15 for Ancient. I've added another +2 because as they've gotten older, they've gotten wiser. 17 for Worm, 19 for Great Worm. Charisma. Dragons are one of the most charismatic creatures, but for red dragons here, they are chromatic. They are not exactly the nicest, most charismatic. If it was a gold dragon, they would probably have a much higher increase in stats. Wormling, 15 charisma. Young, 19 charisma. That's a +4 jump. Adult, 21. That's a +2 jump. Ancient, 23. That is a +2 jump. I've kept that consistent. +2 jumps for Worm and Great Worm. 25 charisma for Worm, 27 charisma for Great Worm. Pretty easy. Senses, I didn't really think to change too much other than just adding their newfound wisdom scores to it. Um, Red dragons have blind sense, dark vision, and a fairly decent passive perception. Um, which is, if you didn't know, their challenge rating is what their proficiency bonus is, and if you choose to give them expertise in or proficiency in the thing, or maybe even expertise. I know Tiamat has like a 36 passive perception. It's ridiculous. So I've only increased it slightly. You can look at your dragon stats and just maybe increase the radius of the blind sense. The dark vision will probably stay fairly the same. Maybe at a certain point you want to give them true sight depending on how old they are. Maybe they've gotten really wise, maybe they've learned spells. But the most important thing to remember is to increase their passive perception. So because Wyrms have an additional 2 stats, which will give them a +3, instead of a 26 passive perception, they'll have and plus their additional proficiency bonus because of CR, they will have a 28. And then Great Wyrms will have a 30. So passive perception is the biggest thing. Blind sense, that's increased up to you depending on how you feel like running them. CR. CR is in the Dungeon Master's Handbook. I will probably cover how to build monsters in another video, just so you can see how to use it properly. But we've gone CR4 for Wormling, 10 for Young, 17 for Adult, 24 for Ancient. I've gone 28 for Worm and 30 for Great Worm, just jumping in difficulty, and that is also the next jump in proficiency bonus as well. There might be a slight differentiation in there. I just increased it to make them have a higher proficiency and show that they're more of a threat. Legendary resistances. Young and Wormling dragons don't have legendary resistances. Adult, Ancient, and Beyond do. They start as adults once they get legendary resistances, 3 a day. I have kept that consistent. Ancient has 3 a day. Worm has 3 a day. Great Worm has 3 a day. Their attack. So their attack bonus is based on the proficiency bonus that they are given plus their strength. So their first attack is their bite attack. I'll just stick with Ancient for now, comparing how I've changed them from Ancient to where they are now. Because if I go through, some of them are inconsistent, like Wormling does not have a claw or a tail attack or a frightful presence, so I will just compare it to the Ancient. Ancient Red Dragons have a +17 to hit, reach of 15. For my Worm and Great Worm, I have increased that to a +18 for the Worm, +19 for the Great Worm. The reach has stayed the same. That's a personal choice. If you want to make really big dragons, that's up to you. Their damage output from their bite, Ancient is 21 2d10 +10, 14 fire damage, 46. For the Great Worm, I've increased the damage die by 1, or added 1 damage die, so 27 is their average, 3d10 +10, and same fire damage, 46, average of 14. For the Great Worm, I have kept, from the Worm to the Great Worm, I've kept the damage the same, the 3d10 +10, and increased their fire by 1, making it a 17 or 5d6 fire. Their claw attacks, same to hit, is +17 for the Ancient, +18 for the Worm, +19 for the Great Worm. They all have 2 attacks. They get a multi-attack with their claw attacks. Ancient has 2d6 +10 for damage. This is a reach of 10 feet. Worm has 3d6 +10, and Great Worm I have kept the same, because I feel they have so many more hit points that they're going to be doing more damage over time anyways, and it's more of a consistent damage than other things. Tail attack. This is one thing I've increased, is Ancients have the +17 hit and a reach of 20. For Great Worms, I've increased it to a reach of 20, or for Worms and Great Worms, I've increased it to a reach of 25, showing that they are much larger dragons. You might even be debating increasing it to a 30. I didn't personally, just because I feel like with the awkwardness of them swinging their body around to hit with a tail, I feel like 25 is fair. Damage has increased. Ancient Dragons do 2d8 +10. Worm does 3d8 +10. Same with the Great Worm. Their frightful presence now. This is one thing that I find interesting, because the reason I haven't changed the damage much from the worm to the great worm is their frightful presence is that much more, meaning many players won't be doing as much damage to them for the first little bit. And some of these saving throws, you better hope they have some really good wisdom saves, or at least someone in their party is a paladin that can help give them a bonus or shake them out of it. Uh, Ancient Dragons, 120 feet, DC 21 wisdom save. I've kept the radius the same, the distance the same. I've changed the difficulty class. For Worm having a 23 wisdom save, and for the Great Worm having a 25. So for characters with proficiency in wisdom saves at this level, at the level they should be while fighting the Great Worm, it should be okay. But if you have those martial fighters on your team who decide not to go into wisdom, or anyone who uses wisdom as a dump stat, this might be a problem for them, which means they're going to be an even more challenging threat, because I either need, even if they have no proficiency in it, they need a nat 20 and to have a full wisdom score, or need the help of an ally. Breath Weapon, 90-foot cone for Ancient Dragons, DC 24 dexterity saving throw, 26 d6 fire damage. Recharges on a 5 or 6 of a d6 dice roll each turn. The fire breath, the recharge rate, I have kept the same. That is something I debated long and hard on, just because of the fact that they're older, they might be able to use it more frequently, but being able to use it there's a little bit of give and take there, because worms and great worms, or any dragon really, their breath weapon is a full action unless you're Tiamat, which means they don't get a chance to do the 3 different attacks to 3 different people, but it still is a decent amount of damage. So there's a give and take there. If they get their breath weapon back, they're probably going to use it. If you have people with fire resistance, maybe a barbarian with fire resistance, or someone who has a good dex save with fire resistance, they're going to take a lot less damage. But keep in mind, anyone who's not, because not everyone's going to have a good save, is going to be taking the full brunt of this damage. So recharge rate kept the same. DC and damage. DC 24 for Ancient, DC 26 for Worm, DC 27 for Great Worm. Increased it slightly each time, making it a little bit harder. Most people, rogues, monks, barbarians, will have an easy time dodging out of the way of this. If you have a paladin with very heavy plate mail and they don't have dexterity, they're not going to have a fun combat encounter. Damage has been increased. Ancient has a 26 d6, which is a 91 average. Worm has 30 d6, 105 average. Great Worm has 38 d6, 133 average. So 133 is a lot. Unless they have resistance and they succeed their save, that's not going to do much damage to them anymore, especially if you're using average. That'll be a quarter of the damage. That'll be roughly 37, if I'm doing that correctly. Maybe. No, less than that. The reach for the breath weapon, Ancient has a 90-foot cone. I have kept that consistent, and that is up for debate as well. I was very heavily debating changing Great Worms to a 120-foot cone. It does make a lot of sense to me, and that's probably just going to be up to the dragon specifically. If it's an older dragon who uses their breath weapon more, maybe there's someone who's, I don't know, plot point, maybe make it easier for the adventurers. This dragon doesn't have the ability to breathe fire anymore, and adventurer stopped him from doing that. I didn't cover anything like regional effects or legendary actions, because legendary actions are pretty much going to be kept consistent from older dragons. If they have spellcasting, if you've given them innate spellcasting, and your party's not going to like you if you give a Great Worm additional spellcasting, and this just the legendary actions to claw or detect on their turn, that's pretty much going to stay consistent, or you can change that. Regional effects are all up to the DM, honestly, and you might just have an entire volcano spread the course of a few miles based on if a Great Worm is there. That's all up to you as the DM, and that's pretty much it for that, for the stats. So you can apply this system to any other dragon type, making either older dragons, like I did, the Worm and the Great Worm, or if you compare the Wormling to the young, you can find the middle ground in there to make the younger dragon categories, the very young. If you compare the young to the adult, you can make the juvenile or the young adult. Adult to ancient, you can make mature adult, old, very old, before you get to ancient. This makes it so that different player levels can encounter dragons more frequently, especially if you have a lot more dragons in your campaign, you're heavily focused on dragons, because otherwise you're going to have parties either fighting dragons that are way under level them with and at that point you'll have to get creative with the regional effects, with who helps them in encounters, and that can be really fun as well. But if you want a really nice challenging fight, you want something around the same level and not too far above. um, the only other age category for dragons that I have not mentioned yet is the twilight stage. This is what happens when a dragon starts to die from old age. They rapidly weaken and become more frail in the few months or years it takes them to pass on. If you'd like to see a video on how to stat a Twilight Dragon or how to run them in your game, put a message down below. I'll check them out. I'll see what I can do to make a stat for them. They're quite interesting, and there's a lot in the 3.5 Dragonomicon about them. And that's all I have for today. If you like what you saw, please give this video a like, and if you have any suggestions you'd like to see for future video topics, please leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye.